Chapter 361. Jingyu's restaurant was filled with customers every day. As soon as Jingyu entered the restaurant, she could hear Shan Yuqing talking excitedly in her ear. He was talking about the income for the past few days. Jingyu's restaurant was so famous that many outsiders naturally came to visit. Can't sit? Jingyu stared at Shan Yuqing and said, Can't sit? Isn't that simple? Go and enclose the entire area outside the restaurant. Build a shed or something and set up tables and chairs. You can sit as many people as you want. Ahem. Boss. This? Shan Yuqing was stunned and looked at Jingyu speechlessly. Just do as I say. Why would you care about where you sit if you want to eat? Jingyu said as she waved her hand indifferently. Yes. Shan Yuqing replied silently. Sure enough, he followed Jingyu's instructions and encircled the entire open space outside the restaurant. Clanking sounds could be heard as he built a simple shed. Just like that, he set up tables and chairs. At the same time, he also gave a discount. Those who sat outside would have a discount and could save money. Once such a strategy was put out, it was indeed effective. Those who were not very rich were willing to choose to work outside. Who wouldn't want to save money if they could? Jingyu saw that the restaurant was empty and went to Enichang Court. In the courtyard, Tang Hongyang had been looking forward to Jingyu's arrival. When he saw Jingyu, his eyes curved into crescents. Jingyu angrily threw the design blueprint into Tang Hongyang's hands. This person wasn't looking forward to Jingyu. He was looking forward to Jingyu's design blueprint. How are the Yao sisters doing here? In the backyard, Jingyu took a sip of tea and asked faintly, Good. Tang Hongyang's face was full of joy as he said, This Yao Rong is really capable. She's good at accounting and management. Her younger sister, Yao Yu, is very skilled. She's good at communicating with people. Look, it's only been a few days, but the people in the restaurant are full of praise for these two sisters. Not bad, not bad. Jingyu nodded and said, Then do you think these two can be of great use? Tang Hongyang was slightly taken aback when he heard this. He immediately thought about it carefully. He naturally understood the meaning behind Jingyu's words. Jingyu was obviously asking if these two people were trustworthy and if their hearts were upright. It would be over if they were spies sent by someone else. Boss, I can't guarantee this. Tang Hongyang deliberated for a moment and said, I think that these two sisters aren't people with bad intentions. However, we haven't known each other for a long time, so I can't be too sure. However, if you're in a hurry to find someone, I think we can give it a try. Jingyu's eyes turned slightly, and then she slowly smiled and said, Okay, I'll listen to you. We'll know once we give it a try. Jingyu immediately called the two sisters to the backyard and sent Tang Hongyang out. The three of them talked in the house for a full 4 hours before the door was opened. Tang Hongyang was very curious. He looked at the Yao sisters' faces, which were slightly flushed, but their eyes were bright. He was very curious and wanted to find out what they were talking about. However, he didn't expect that the two of them would keep quiet. After that, the Yao sisters got busy. Jingyu generously gave them a sum of money and told them to buy a shop as soon as possible. It was obvious that he was not an ordinary person, but he was dressed in a plain white robe. It's fine if you don't give way when I walk in, but you actually bump into me. The woman sneered as she stared at the man and said, If you kneel down and kowtow to this young miss 3 times, I wouldn't care about it. I didn't expect you to actually dare to ask me to apologize. How dare you? You. The man glared and said, The door is so big, and you brought your people to occupy the entire path. This one was just looking for a gap to walk out, but you pushed me back. How is it that I bumped into you? The man had an unbearable expression as his handsome face turned red. I said it was you who bumped into me. It was you who bumped into me. The woman didn't say anything else. She raised her hand and shouted, Men, tie him up. Cut off one of his hands as an apology to this young miss. Xiao Yu. Just as the guards were about to go up, the man who had been standing quietly beside the woman said, This is the Tokyo country. Don't be naughty. Chapter 363. This is the Tokyo's territory after all. Don't be naughty. Then cut off one of your fingers. The woman called Xiao Yu seemed to be a little afraid of the man beside her. She frowned slightly and loosened her grip. The man raised his eyebrows slightly but didn't say anything. The guards immediately went forward to grab the man in white. "You? Do you have any respect for the law?" Let me go." The man's face turned red. He wanted to struggle, but he didn't have the strength to truss up a chicken. How could he be a match for the guards? He was quickly caught. The woman in luxurious clothes sneered and was about to walk towards the man in white. "Stop!" The crowd sighed as they watched, but no one stepped forward to stop them. That was until a clear shout rang out. The crowd slowly opened up a path for Jingyu to walk over with light steps. Her gaze swept across the crowd as she pondered. Jingyu sized up the other party, but they were also sizing up Jingyu. Jingyu's petite figure stood in front of everyone. Her eyes were bright without any ripples, and there was a faint smile at the corner of her mouth. Although her robe was simple, it definitely didn't look like something an ordinary person could afford to wear. "Who are you?" The woman in luxurious clothes was interrupted by Jingyu and was very unhappy. She frowned slightly and stared at Jingyu. "I'm the manager of this restaurant." Jingyu's eyes curved slightly as she looked at the two people in front of her and said, "I wonder which country you two are from? Why didn't you rest at the embassy when you came to the Tokyo?" The moment Jingyu spoke, the surrounding crowd widened their eyes in shock. Their eyes were like searchlights shining on the two people. The woman also widened her eyes in shock. She stared at Jingyu and said, "How do you know we're not from the Tokyo? Looks like they really are the prince and princess of another country." As soon as the woman finished speaking, Jingyu suddenly let out a sigh of relief and said, "I was just randomly guessing. I didn't expect that I would be right. Since the two of you are here as guests, then this matter will be much easier." "You." The woman was furious. Just as she was about to flare up, she was pulled back by the man beside her. "Did you just say that you were the manager of this restaurant?" The man narrowed his eyes as he looked at Jingyu. His eyes were filled with scrutiny. His eagle-like eyes stared at Jingyu, making Jingyu's hair stand on end. "Is there something wrong?" Jingyu covered her mouth and smiled. "You two must be Nanli's crown Prince Mu Qinghua and Princess Mu Xiaoye, right?" "Why do you say that?" The man narrowed his eyes and looked at Jingyu with interest. "It's very simple. Your Highness, the jade pendant hanging on your waist is from Nanli's royal family. Coincidentally, I saw a portrait of this jade pendant a few days ago, so..." Jingyu smiled. Jingyu didn't say anything else, but everyone knew. "I see." Mu Qinghua looked down at the jade pendant hanging on his waist and said faintly, "It's good that you know that we are from Nanli." Mu Xiaoye proudly raised her chin and said, "That man behind you, he was the one who offended this princess. Your Highness, the celebration is approaching. It's not good to see blood. This would be disrespectful to the Tokyo Emperor. Please forgive me for not being able to comply." Jingyu smiled faintly and said, "If your Highness insists, then please allow me to pass on this matter to the 9 emperors. After all, the 9 emperors are very fond of this restaurant." Chapter 364. Jingyu lied through her teeth. Anyway, she was just making things up. Xiaoqian didn't say that he didn't like this restaurant. The 9th emperors? Mu Xiaoye's eyes widened slightly. "You mean the 9th emperors, Xiaoqian? In this Tokyo imperial city, who dares to be called the 9th emperors?" Jingyu didn't answer her question. Mu Xiaoye's expression suddenly became strange. "Forget it." Mu Xiaoye hesitated for a long time. In the end, she curled her lips and said, "Cough, cough. Since you came forward to plead for leniency, this princess will be merciful and not bicker with him. But if you see this princess in the future, you must make a detour. Otherwise, the next time I see you, this princess won't let you go." "Humph. Hee. Interesting." Mu Qinghua's eyes circled around Jingyu. In the end, she left with her people. The crowd of onlookers dispersed. This farce became a joke in the streets. The incident between the 9th emperors and the restaurant spread like wildfire. "Phew. Really?" Jingyu's face fell when she saw that everyone had left. She laughed so hard that her face almost froze. "Okay. Bullies." The man in white looked at the people walking away. His handsome face was flushed red. In the end, He threw out these 4 words indignantly. Jingyu, who had just let out a sigh of relief, was instantly displeased. Since you know that they are bullying, you shouldn't have confronted them. Really? I'm speechless. Jingyu rolled her eyes and turned to go upstairs. Miss, what do you mean by that? Are you going to let them bully you? When the man in white heard Jingyu's words, he immediately widened his eyes and raised his hand to block Jingyu's path with a look that said, I want to teach you a lesson. What are you doing? Did I say something wrong? Jingyu glared at the man and said, What's there to bully? Wasn't it just lowering his head and giving way? What's the big deal? You don't have any power or influence, yet you still want to step up? Was he especially pleased with himself in his heart? A real man should be indomitable. How could he be bullied? In any case, you only have one life. You can just give it to someone else. Is that what you think? Jingyu said it in a strange tone. The man's face turned red and he couldn't say a word. What? Are you unhappy that you didn't die? Do you want me to give you a ride? Jingyu sneered and said, It's over. After he died, you also became famous. There was a rumor on the streets that a scholar was killed because he didn't give way to a prince or a princess. They just laughed it off. What about you? Oh, he's dead. I'm really speechless. There are actually people who have such thoughts. Jingyu's face was full of disdain. She looked at the man indifferently and turned to leave without looking back. You. The man's face turned red from Jingyu's words. He held his breath and couldn't go up or down. He watched as Jingyu went up the stairs. In the end, he unhappily flung his sleeves and left without looking back. His heart was full of anger. Finally, after walking for a while, the man suddenly stopped in his tracks. He thought for a while and frowned. Then, he turned around and went back. Boss. Shin Yuqing was about to speak to Jingyu but was interrupted by Jingyu. Go to the door and tell that man to go back to where he came from. This lady has no time to deal with him. Jingyu raised her hand and took a big gulp of tea as she spoke to Shin Yuqing. Boss, are you talking about that scholar? Shin Yuqing was slightly stunned and asked. Chapter 365. Jingyu nodded calmly. Shin Yuqing went downstairs in confusion. Didn't he just see the scholar leave in a huff? Why did the boss say that he would return? Shin Yuqing walked to the door with a face full of questions. Just as he stood at the door, he saw the scholar who had just left walking back in a hurry. Hey. Shin Yuqing saw that the scholar was about to barge in without another word. Shin Yuqing quickly blocked his path. Oh, shopkeeper, I want to see your manager. The man looked at Shin Yuqing and recognized him as the boss of the restaurant. He immediately bowed politely. Really? Shin Yuqing stared at him and said, Our manager isn't free. Go back to where you came from. Nonsense, she was just here. The man glared and said, Don't block me. Let me talk to her for a while and I'll leave. The man said as he walked around Shin Yuqing. Shin Yuqing didn't give him the chance. He quickly blocked him and said, Our manager has already left. Left? So fast? The man was slightly stunned. Then, he frowned and muttered, She saved my life. But she didn't want me to thank her. She even purposely angered me. Such a woman is really... No, I must find her. Shin Yuqing heard the man's muttering and his eyes widened in shock. He almost laughed out loud. Manager, when will your stewards come to the restaurant? The man looked at Shin Yuqing and asked with a look of curiosity. Cough, cough. This. Shin Yuqing held back his laughter and said, The manager has always been elusive. Sometimes, he comes once every 2 or 3 days. Sometimes, he comes once every 1 or 2 months. There are even times when you don't see him for half a year. You better not wait. So casual? He's indeed a man of the pugilistic world. The man was stunned at first. Then, he said something that almost made Shin Yuqing spit out. A man of the pugilistic world. A man. Ha. The boss has become a man. It's okay. I'll wait for as long as it takes. The man grabbed Shin Yuqing's hand and said, I'll come every day in the future. Please keep an eye out for me. If your manager comes, you must send someone to inform me. Cough, cough, cough. Okay. Shin Yuqing agreed and said, Where can I inform you? I haven't found my friend. I'll go look for her now. I'll tell you tomorrow. As the man spoke, he suddenly seemed to have thought of something important. He patted his head in annoyance, bowed to Shen Yuqing, and left with a puzzled expression. Where? The imperial city was really messy. Anyone they met could be a prince of another country. Jingyu pursed her lips. She thought that it would be better not to run around during this period of time. At the same time, she ordered her subordinates to behave. Just as Jingyu was about to return to the residence, she saw Xing Er dismounting from his horse and striding towards her. Chapter 366. Imperial Consort. Xing Er bowed slightly to Jingyu and said, Master wants Imperial Consort to go to the residence tomorrow. He has something to discuss with Imperial Consort. Tomorrow? Jingyu frowned in confusion and asked Xing Er what it was about. Xing Er didn't know anything. Jingyu had no choice but to agree. After returning to the Prime Minister's residence, Jingyu had been running all over the place. She hadn't been back to the prince's residence for a few months. Now that she was back all of a sudden, there was a sense of nostalgia. Second Xing was already waiting at the door, and he led Jingyu to the lotus garden. Ayaya, the lotus flowers have grown again. Jingyu gazed at the lotus flowers in the lotus garden. Her eyes were filled with nostalgia. If you like it, you can come back and stay. Just as Jingyu was admiring the flowers, a familiar voice came from behind her. Jingyu turned around and saw Xiao Chun standing on the stairs with his hands behind his back. His expression was indifferent, and his figure was slender. His pitch-black eyes were filled with gentleness as he looked at Jingyu. Xiao Chun. Jingyu ran over happily. She looked up at Xiao Chun and asked, When did you stand behind me? Just now. Xiao Chun looked down at Jingyu's bright cheeks. The corners of his mouth curled up as he replied, That's strange. I didn't feel it at all. Jingyu pursed her lips. Why did you call me to the residence? Come with me to the celebration banquet the day after tomorrow. Xiao Chun walked down the stairs and naturally took Jingyu's hand. He walked towards the pavilion and spoke to Jingyu calmly. Jingyu paused for a moment, then furrowed her brows and said, No, Big Brother said that I have to go with Father, and I have to go as the granddaughter of the Prime Minister. I can't be in two places, no. Xiao Chen's face darkened, and he frowned. Isn't it just going to a banquet? Jingyu curled her lips and said, It doesn't matter who you go with, it doesn't matter. Xiao Chun continued to frown. How about, I follow this father into the palace, and when it's time to leave, I'll leave with you? Jingyu said with a frown. Do you want to come back to the prince's mansion with me? Xiao Chen's hand paused as he narrowed his eyes at Jingyu. I'll stay for one night, Jingyu said as she stretched out one finger. Xiao Chen's face darkened and he said coldly, 1 month? 1 month is too long. How about half a month? Jingyu bit her lips and asked tentatively, Deal. Xiao Chen reached out and grabbed Jingyu's small hand, and a faint smile appeared in his dark eyes. Jingyu was instantly stunned. Why did she feel like she had been sold? She had been sold by herself. When they returned to the Prime Minister's mansion, Jingyu still had a stomach full of anger. Xiao Chun, that damned old fox. However, when she saw the clothes that Xiao Chun had people prepare for her, Jingyu curled her lips. At least he still had some conscience. If Jingyu had to prepare herself, Jingyu would definitely just wear a random set of clothes. She really didn't have the time to choose this or that. If she had the time, she might as well sleep a little more, right? The Tokyo celebration arrived as scheduled. Early in the morning, Jingyu was picked up from the bed by Yin Xiao. As she helped Jingyu put on her clothes, she kept nagging, Imperial concubine, you have to hurry. The 9th Emperor said that if I don't dress you up beautifully, I'll be dead for sure. Double 12 of the mini theater, Xiao Chun. Which flavor do you think is good? Jingyu lay on the bed in a dilemma as she stared at the screen of her phone and swiped up and down. Xiao Chun lay beside Jingyu and narrowed his eyes as he looked at Jingyu's phone. What flavor do you like? Blueberry? Strawberry? Lemon? Milk? Jingyu looked up at Xiao Chun and asked. Xiao Chun was speechless. Do you want some of each? Jingyu pouted and asked again. Xiao Chen's face darkened. He narrowed his eyes and stared at Jingyu. Are you sure you want to choose the flavor when buying condoms? Chapter 367. Imperial Consort, you have to hurry. The ninth emperor said that if I don't dress you up prettily, this servant will be dead for sure, dash. Jingyu closed her eyes and allowed Yin Xiao to do as she pleased, as if she was sleepwalking. Open your eyes. Don't open them so wide. Yin Xiao directed Jingyu and meticulously put on Jingyu's makeup. Once the rich fragrance was released, it made Jingyu cough repeatedly. She instantly woke up halfway. She raised her hand to push aside the things Yin Xiao was picking and took the refreshing rouge from the side, saying, "Use this?" "Oh." Yin Xiao responded with hidden bitterness. She clearly didn't want to use such a fragrant rouge and liked to use this bland one. AI. She really couldn't understand her imperial consort. Those young misses were all thinking of ways to show themselves, but her imperial consort, looking at her, if she said that she didn't need to enter the palace, Yin Xiao didn't doubt that Jingyu would definitely take off her clothes, hide in the blankets, and continue to sleep without another word. From the moment the sun rose until the sky was completely bright, Jingyu was in a half-awake state. Only when Yin Xiao said that she was done, did Jingyu lazily stretch. She didn't even look at herself in the mirror before turning to leave in a daze. AI, Imperial Consort, you're not going to look? Yin Xiao glared. There's nothing to look at. Let's go. Father is waiting. Jingyu gave an extremely ungraceful yawn. Lifting her skirt, she walked out the door. Yin Xiao held her forehead and followed. What kind of master did she have? The Prime Minister Fu's carriage swayed as it headed towards the imperial palace. Jingyu hung her head and continued to sleep the moment she got on the carriage. She instructed Yin Xiao to call her when they arrived, and then there was no more. How many times had Jingyu entered the imperial palace? She had almost forgotten. Looking at the majestic palace gates in front of her, Jingyu sighed for the nth time. Why did she have to enter the palace every time? It was simply annoying. When the celebration started, everyone found their seats to enter. This magnificent palace was incomparably breathtaking. Jingyu looked at this palace and thought of the imperial palace she saw in modern Beijing's Tiananmen Square in her previous life. Back then, she didn't have this feeling. Now that there were so many ancient people walking around and looking at this building, she suddenly had a feeling that it was out of place. Jingyu! A surprised cry sounded. Jingyu turned her head to look. Lan, you're here too. Jingyu looked at Shangguan Linglan, who was walking over, and a faint smile appeared in her eyes. Today, Shangguan Linglan was wearing a dark purple palace robe. He had a neutral but very imposing appearance. He strode over to Jingyu's side. You're finally here. Why are you so late? Shangguan Linglan smiled as he held Jingyu's arm and spoke warmly. Why isn't Miaoqiu here? Jingyu suspiciously glanced around and didn't see Lu Miaoqiu's figure. She immediately opened her mouth and asked, Miaoqiu is a concubine's daughter. She doesn't have the right to come to this kind of banquet unless she has a big backer like Jing Yin. Shangguan Linglan said as he pursed his lips in disdain. He looked to the other side. Jingyu was slightly stunned when she heard this and also looked over. Sure enough, she saw Jing Yin. So she came with Xiao Jingran. Jingyu looked at Jing Yin, who was standing beside Xiao Jingran. Her eyes flickered slightly. This Jing Yin was really good. She could really make Xiao Jingran bring her to this banquet. Jingyu and Shangguan Linglan talked for a while. Suddenly, the announcement of the arrival of the Emperor and Empress was heard. Everyone retreated to both sides and knelt down to shout, Long live the Emperor. Jingyu curtsied and lowered her head. Did you see? Pairs of feet were walking towards the dragon throne. Only when she heard the call to rise did she slowly straighten up. Chapter 368. Xiaoyu was wearing a bright yellow dragon robe as he sat on the main seat. Empress Fei Yaju sat beside him, and on the other side was Fu Ruoqing, Consort Qing. Although Fu Ruoqing's rank had been demoted, she was still favored by the emperor. She might even be promoted back at any time. The emperor would naturally bring Fu Ruoqing to such an important banquet. After that, the ninth imperial uncle, Xiao Chun, and the crown prince came in hand. Everyone was finally gathered in one place. Jingyu followed Jingzhan, and took their seats one by one. When everyone was seated, the surroundings gradually quieted down. Xiao Yi waved his hand slightly. The eunuch at the door bowed and saluted. He straightened up and loudly announced, "Summon the envoys of the various countries." Jingyu raised her eyes and looked at the door. Two slender figures stepped into the hall. Jingyu was familiar with these two people. They were the prince and princess of the Nanli kingdom. They were the crown prince, Mu Qinghua, and the little princess, Mu Xiaoye. Looking at their arrogant faces, Jingyu's mouth twitched. These people were all looking down on others. Weren't they tired? Greetings to the Tokyo Emperor and Empress. Mu Qinghua and Mu Xiaoye bowed and didn't kneel. Quickly rise. Xiao Yi smiled and said, I didn't expect the crown prince to personally come this time. It must have been hard on you. I've always wanted to see the Tokyo banquet. I'm here to greet your majesty on behalf of Imperial Father. Mu Qinghua smiled faintly and said, This is a congratulatory gift prepared by Nanli. I hope your majesty will kindly accept it. Mu Qinghua waved his hand, and a few burly men behind him carried a large box forward. He pointed at the box and said to Xiao Yi, This is a gift that this little prince has prepared. I just don't know if the Tokyo will accept it. Oh? What kind of gift can the Tokyo not accept? Xiao Yi narrowed his eyes and frowned as he looked at the box with a strange expression. There's no hurry. It won't be too late to see it when the people from the Northern Pastoral and Cebu arrive. Mu Qinghua's lips curled into a cold smile. She bowed slightly to Xiao Yi and led Mu Xiaoye to her seat. Once Mu Xiaoye sat down, her round eyes began to look around as if she was looking for someone. Everyone's heart skipped a beat as they looked at Mu Xiaoye. Finally, they saw Mu Xiaoye's gaze land on Xiao Chen's face. The surprise in her eyes made Xiao Ye's brows jump, but his expression didn't change. The eunuch at the door continued to read. Hellion Theo? Jingyu turned her head and saw a figure walking briskly into the room. This person in a dark green robe was actually Hellion Theo? Jingyu's eyes widened as she looked at Hellion Xiao, who was slowly walking towards her. His aura was extraordinary. The corners of his lips were pursed slightly, and he wasn't smiling, but he still gave off an extremely breathtaking feeling. Such a handsome man simply made women feel ashamed of their appearance. Your Majesty Tokyo, I'm back. Hellion Theo raised his eyebrows and bowed politely to Xiao Yi. Welcome, welcome. I heard that the fifth prince participated in the power struggle after returning to the Northern Pastoral. Xiao Ye's eyes narrowed dangerously. His words made Xiao Jingran, Mu Qinghua, and the others look at Hellion Theo. The days after returning to the country were too boring, so I found something fun to play with. Hellion Theo replied cleverly. He smiled and said, This is a gift from the Northern Pastoral. Please accept it, Your Majesty. Chapter 369. After saying that, Hellion Theo clapped his hands and another huge box was brought up. Everyone's eyes widened slightly as they looked at the box in front of them with a strange expression. Hellion Theo looked at everyone's expressions and the corner of his mouth curled up. He raised his hand and gestured for the box to be opened. Everyone craned their necks to look at the open box. A graceful woman slowly stood up. She had a beautiful face and was only wearing a light muslin dress. When the box was opened, it was as if a wisp of fragrance floated past the tip of their noses, causing everyone's eyes to be filled with infatuation. The snake beauty is presented to His Majesty. Hellion Theo chuckled and said lightly, Ha ha ha. Xiao Yi laughed dryly. Looking at the beauty, she was really like a snake. Her waist and body were especially seductive. Her whole body was filled with a wild beauty. Everyone was imagining what a woman like her would look like in bed. How ruthless! Jingyu stared at the coquettish woman who was being led away and silently retracted her gaze. It had to be said that this woman's allure was too great. The moment Jingyu saw her, she felt her heart tremble. However, to present a beauty to Xiao Yi in front of the Empress, it had to be said that now Fei Yaju and Fu Ruoqing hated Hellion Theo. However, Hellion Theo didn't feel it at all. He chuckled and sat down in his seat. His eyes swept over and met Jingyu's gaze. Immediately, the smile in his eyes deepened. Evildoer. Jingyu rolled her eyes and ignored Hellion Theo's smile. Jingyu had seen the people from Northern Pastoral and Nanli before. However, Jingyu was really curious about the people from Cebu. What kind of big shot would come from Cebu? Everyone once again turned to look at the entrance of the hall. As the announcement was made, an ink-black figure slowly walked in under everyone's gazes. The man who walked in with steady steps was dressed in an ink-black robe. His expression was cold and threatening, and his exquisite facial features were very handsome. This man walked over as if he was taking a stroll in the courtyard, but everyone could feel a strong, murderous aura coming from him. Looking at the man in luxurious clothes in front of them, they felt as if they were looking at a general bathed in blood on the battlefield. He was cold, ruthless, and decisive. The Crown Prince of Cebu, Wei Ling, when Jing Lang saw who it was, his eyes were first filled with surprise, then a dignified expression. He said lightly, "The Crown Prince of Cebu?" Jingyu was slightly taken aback when she heard this and then looked over. For some reason, when Jingyu looked at Wei Ling, she suddenly felt as if she saw Xiao Qin's figure in Wei Ling. They were both so cold and indifferent, as if they didn't care about anyone or anything. It was obvious that Wei Ling was such a person. Wei Ling stopped in his tracks. He didn't bow to Xiao Qin first, but slowly looked around before his gaze landed on Xiao Qin. His cold face carried a faint smile, and his sharp gaze was like a sword as he looked at Xiao Qin. "Xiao Qin, long time no see. How have you been?" Wei Ling ignored everyone and greeted Xiao Qin as if he was declaring war. "How have you been?" Xiao Qin and Wei Ling looked at each other for a long time. In the end, Xiao Qin lowered his eyes and said to Wei Ling as if he had one. Suddenly, Wei Ling's face stiffened. He coldly snorted and turned his head, bowing to Xiao Yi with incomparable arrogance. Cebu's gift was the most ordinary, just a long sword. Cebu was famous for their martial arts, and this long sword could be said to be an extraordinary item. Chapter 370. Although Wei Ling was the most rude one, Xiao Yi treated him the best. After all, he didn't give anything. Now that everyone was here, Xiao Yi watched as Wei Ling sat down. Then, he looked at the box beside the Nanli King's seat and frowned. "Crown Prince Mu, now that everyone is here, why don't you let everyone see your gift?" Xiao Yi curled his lips slightly and said with an amiable smile, "Ha ha ha." Mu Qinghua stood up and said, "Your Majesty, this is a treasure that I dug up from a tomb in Nanli. It's an intact chessboard. Let's call it a chessboard for now." "Chessboard?" Xiao Yi frowned. Everyone started whispering to each other. "This chessboard isn't the same chessboard." Mu Qinghua smiled and said, "Everyone will know once you see it." Mu Qinghua raised her hand and waved. The two of them slowly opened the box. They directly removed the 5 sides, leaving only the base. The thing inside was also revealed. It was something like a stone table. There was indeed a chessboard on it, but it didn't look like a chessboard. "What is this thing?" The officials who were closer to it stood up and looked at the strange symbols on it. They had never seen these symbols before. This was a chessboard? "This game is called the 9 Palaces Grid." Mu Qinghua said. "The owner of the tomb carved his name on it. However, I couldn't find a way to solve this chessboard after checking all the historical records. I heard that there are many talented people in Nanli. I wonder if your Majesty can invite someone to solve this chessboard?" "Ha ha ha. Isn't it just a game of chess? Who wants to try?" Xiao Ye's expression was slightly strange, but he didn't show it on his face. Instead, he smiled happily. "Your Majesty, there's no need to rush. I'll give your Majesty 3 days to solve this chessboard. If you can't solve it in 3 days, then it seems that I overestimated the Nanli Kingdom. The Nanli Kingdom is the leader of the 4 kingdoms." Mu Qinghua smiled faintly. After she finished speaking, she turned around and returned to her seat, ignoring everyone's expression. "Crown Prince Mu, let's leave these words for 3 days later." Xiao Jingren sneered and said, "It's just a broken chess game. Why can't it be broken? Since Second Prince has said so, why don't we go up and give it a try?" Mu Qinghua said. Everyone turned to look at Xiao Jingran. "Let's give it a try." Xiao Jingran narrowed his eyes and strode forward. He looked at the chessboard in front of him, and his expression changed. He didn't know what the symbols were, and he couldn't recognize them at all. Furthermore, there were some symbols around the chessboard that looked like bean sprouts. He couldn't understand them at all. How could they know how to break this? Xiao Jingran stretched out his hand to test it. The protruding thing could be pushed. He tried to push it left and right, but there was no reaction. This is a mechanism. Only by solving the chessboard can you get what's inside. Nanli, wanted to chisel the rock open, but I found that the rock doesn't fear swords. I can't pry it open at all. So, second prince, you should figure out how to move the chessboard properly. Mu Qinghua laughed mockingly. Xiao Jingran's face turned red. This chessboard is very exquisite. This prince needs to go back and study it carefully before I can decipher it. Xiao Jingran tried for a long time, but to no avail. He had no choice but to casually say something and slink back to his seat. Feeling the mocking gazes directed at him, Xiao Jingran's face instantly turned ashen with anger. Chapter 371. Crown Prince Mu. This little girl wants to give it a try. Is it possible? Jing Yin saw Xiao Jingran's expression and hesitated for a moment before standing up. She bowed slightly to Mu Qinghua and asked with a faint smile, "Who are you?" Mu Qinghua was slightly taken aback and said mockingly, "Even the second prince couldn't decipher it. Do you think you're better than the second prince? That you have the ability to decipher this game?" Jing Yan's expression changed slightly, but immediately recovered. She smiled faintly and said, "Since Crown Prince Mu wants the Tokyo to decipher it, then there shouldn't be a difference between men and women, right? Besides, this little girl just wants to give it a try and see how exquisite this game is." Haha, if you want to give it a try, then go ahead. Mu Qinghua smiled disdainfully. He clearly didn't think highly of Jing Yin. As expected, when Jing Yin stood in front of the chessboard, she immediately fainted. What kind of game was this? The scribbles on the chess pieces were indecipherable. Jing Yin was defeated with a red face. After that, people came forward one after another. There were men and women, old and young, but no one could decipher the game. Xiao Yi, who was sitting on the high seat, looked worse and worse. Even Xiao Chun, who was sitting below, frowned. On the other hand, Helian Xiu and Wei Ling were just watching the show. Their faint smiles made Xiao Ye's expression turn even uglier. He was being treated as a joke by others. "Your Majesty, it seems that no one in your Tokyo can decipher this game. Let's wait 3 days and see if we can find a way to decipher it." Mu Qinghua smiled faintly and said disdainfully, "This." Everyone started whispering to each other when they heard this. Their expressions were very ugly. "Isn't it just a game? Even our Tokyo children can decipher it." At this moment, a clear voice suddenly sounded in the hall. Everyone turned to look at the source of the voice. At the table, Jingyu was wearing a dark red robe. The person who spoke was Jingyu. "It's you." Mu Qinghua looked up and recognized Jingyu at a glance. "It's me." Jingyu supported herself with her hands and stood up. When Jing Zhan and Jing Lang saw Jingyu's actions, they immediately revealed worried expressions. Jingyu lowered her eyes and smiled faintly. She looked very calm as she stepped into the banquet. Immediately, everyone's gaze fell on Jingyu. "Did you just say that even a child can crack this game?" Mu Qinghua's face was a little surprised. Then, it was full of mockery and disbelief. She stared at Jingyu and asked, "That's right. This kind of game is just a child's toy in my Tokyo eyes." Jingyu smiled proudly and stood in front of everyone. "Ha ha ha. Shameless." Mu Qinghua laughed out loud and said, "Ignorant woman. How dare you say that you can let a child break it? Whether it can be broken or not, we'll see in 3 days." Jingyu smiled faintly. She turned to look at Xiao Yi and said, "Your Majesty, please allow me to make a bet with Crown Prince Mu. 3 days later, I'll ask a child to break this game." "Jingyu, are you confident?" Xiao Ye's expression slowly turned serious. This was a matter that concerned the Tokyo's face. He couldn't be careless. You're really shameless. Even the scholars are helpless. You actually want to ask a child to break it?" Jing Yin looked at Jingyu, who was the center of attention, and a strange thought rose in her heart. She pursed her lips in disdain. Chapter 372. Shut up. Jingyu looked at him indifferently. Before she could say anything, Xiao Jingran, who was beside her, had already reprimanded him. Now, they were facing an external enemy together. No matter what the situation was, they could not say such things. When these words came out, Dongqing's aura lost a little. Even the people of Dongqing did not think highly of him, and he still dared to say such things. Clearly, Mu Qinghua was thinking this way. Jingyu looked at Jing Yin, as if she was looking at a prostitute. She then turned to Xiao Yi and said, "If your majesty trusts this subject's daughter, then give the decree." Xiao Yi hesitated for a moment. Fei Yaju's heart trembled slightly. She whispered a few words into Xiao Ye's ear. Then, Xiao Yi slowly nodded in agreement to Jingyu's words. Mu Qinghua saw this and the smile in her eyes deepened. She laughed loudly and said, "Since that's the case, then we'll see in 3 days how you're going to get a child to solve the game." "What if I solve it?" "So what?" Jingyu smiled and looked at Mu Qinghua. "What?" Mu Qinghua was slightly stunned and asked in confusion, "What? There's no reward for solving the game?" Jingyu blinked in confusion and said, "If there's no reward, then why do we have to solve the game? In any case, it's a congratulatory gift for the emperor. If we don't solve it, then it's the same. Is that not okay? Since it's a gift, then it's naturally the Tokios." As soon as Jingyu said this, everyone's expressions immediately became interesting. Although what she said was true, everyone knew that Nanli State was trying to make things difficult for Dongqing. They didn't expect that after Jingyu's words, it would be so blatantly pointed out. Not only was Mu Qinghua dumbfounded, even Xiao Yi was dumbfounded. Mu Qinghua's face turned ugly. Since Jingyu said so, the situation of solving the chess game suddenly changed. It was like a gambling game. If someone else said this, Mu Qinghua would have 100 excuses to refute it. However, the person who said this was Jingyu. Mu Qinghua didn't know what to say. She was the daughter of an official of Dongqing, a 15-year-old girl, yet she spoke as if she didn't know anything. How could Mu Qinghua refute this? She could only sulk and think about the reward. Since it's a grand ceremony with the 4 countries as witnesses, the reward shouldn't be low, right? Jingyu's words made Mu Qinghua's face turn even uglier. Xiao Yi, who was sitting on the high seat, almost laughed out loud. This was the first time he felt that Jingyu was so pleasing to the eye. They were members of the Tokyo imperial family, so they had to be careful with their words. They weren't like Jingyu, who relied on the fact that she was a woman and didn't know anything. At most, she would be reprimanded for her lack of etiquette. "I heard that Nanli opened up a sea route not long ago. If Crown Prince Mu can use this sea route as a bet, then our Tokyo might be able to solve this game." Jingyu grinned and said. Mu Qinghua's eyes widened. You actually want Nanli Sea territory?" Mu Qinghua stared at Jingyu in disbelief. "Crown Prince Mu, you're wrong. How could I want it? We're just placing a bet. Why would I want it? It's not like I can eat it." Jingyu grinned and turned to look at Xiao Yi. "Your Majesty should also place a bet. We can't let Nanli look down on us." Xiao Ye's heart skipped a beat. He looked at Jingyu and couldn't tell what Jingyu was planning. What if she lost? Chapter 373. Rest assured, Your Majesty. Jingyu saw Xiao Ye's cautiousness and thought to herself, how useless. Isn't it just placing a bet? If Tokyo loses, I will also lose my head to Crown Prince Mu, Jingyu said nonchalantly. When Jingyu finished speaking, everyone's eyes widened. Even Xiao Chun, who had been quietly watching, had his expression turn gloomy. Anger flashed in his eyes. Wei Ling had been paying attention to Xiao Chun. When he saw the change in Xiao Chun, his heart skipped a beat. He looked at Xiao Chun and Jingyu suspiciously. Meanwhile, Shangguan Linglan, Jingyu, and the others looked at Jingyu anxiously. Their faces were full of worry. Jing Yin was surprised at first, but then her eyes flashed with joy. If she could use this opportunity to get rid of Jingyu, wouldn't that be perfect? Helian Xiao and Xiao Jingran were both shocked for a moment. Then, they looked at the person standing in the middle with a complicated expression. Her dark eyes were filled with confidence. They did not know why, but they suddenly felt that what Jingyu said was true. She could really make the child solve this Go game in 3 days. Good. When Xiaoyi heard Jingyu's words, he immediately slapped the table and said, "If Tokyo doesn't solve the game, then the 2 cities in the south of Nanli will be ceded to you. Are you satisfied with this bet?" Ha ha ha. Since your majesty has no objections, then this humble prince is naturally willing to accept. Mu Qinghua heard Xiao Ye's words, and his eyes lit up. He laughed loudly and agreed. This was a huge bet between 2 countries. The person who pushed for this bet was the petite Jingyu standing in the middle of the hall. From start to finish, Jingyu had a nonchalant attitude. It was as if this was nothing in her eyes. In fact, it really wasn't much. When Jingyu heard the words 9 palaces grid, she knew what it was. After that, Jingyu came to the center of the hall and looked at the things on the round table. She felt endless disdain in her heart. This was completely a modern game of numbers. This number was written in characters like 1234, instead of the ancient 1, 2, 3, 4, so they couldn't understand it at all. The bean sprout-like thing next to the 9 square grid was written in modern English. It explained how to play the 9 square grid. The 3 numbers added up to 15. When all the numbers were added up, it would be broken. In the eyes of the ancient people, this was simply fate. But in Jingyu's eyes, it was like a children's book. Therefore, Jingyu did not feel any pressure at all. It was no wonder that she had such an indifferent attitude. She really couldn't be blamed. She was a modern secret agent. She really couldn't afford to treat this kind of mentally retarded game seriously. The banquet ended in a seemingly relaxed atmosphere. Jingyu's name was well known by everyone. When the banquet was about to end, Jingyu finally filled her stomach. During this banquet, everyone was consciously or unconsciously looking at Jingyu. However, Jingyu didn't care at all as she gorged herself on the food. Xiaoyi couldn't stand it anymore. He could only find topics to talk about to attract everyone's attention. This was probably the most helpless banquet the emperor had ever attended. However, after thinking about it, he felt that it was inexplicably interesting. "You heir." Jing Lang looked at Jingyu, who was finally full, and stared at Jingyu with black lines on his forehead. Jing Lang and Jing Zhan finally experienced what it meant to be sitting on pins and needles. Looking at those gazes, they really didn't know how Jingyu could ignore them. Jingyu was slightly stunned when she heard this. Then, she looked at Jing Lang and Jing Zhan in confusion. Chapter 374. What's wrong? Why aren't you guys eating? Jingyu asked in a daze, and Jing Lang and Jing Zhan both fainted at once. Ahem, the banquet is over. Let's go back. Jing Zhan coughed. Seeing the emperor leave, he couldn't stay any longer and hurriedly said, "Oh, it's over." Jingyu stood up and elegantly wiped her mouth. "I'm leaving with Xiao Chun." Jing Zhan and Jing Lang looked at each other. Then, they looked at Jingyu and asked, "You're leaving with the 9th emperors? To the Wang mansion?" Yes. Jingyu nodded and said, "I'm going to stay at the Wang mansion for half a month before going home. You guys can go first." Jing Lang and Jing Zhan looked at each other. They seemed to be conflicted. Then, they looked at Jingyu and said, "Since you've decided, then go." And Jingyu nodded. She didn't notice the strangeness in their words. Jing Lang and Jing Zhan both left. Jingyu looked at each other in confusion. Wasn't it just staying at the Wang mansion for a few days? What was the big deal? However, when Jingyu found out what this action meant, she almost strangled Xiao Qian to death. She had actually become the future concubine of the 9th emperors in such a muddle-headed manner. Furthermore, she had done it so openly and confusedly in front of all the officials and the royal families of the 4 countries. Xiao Qian. Jingyu walked briskly to Xiao Qian's side. Everyone looked over. When they saw Jingyu walk to Xiao Qian's side, they all had strange expressions. Jingyu being the 9th imperial concubine wasn't anything new. However, these two had never shown anything special in such a big occasion. Therefore, everyone was very curious. How exactly did these two interact? "You still know how to come here?" Xiao Qian's face was very ugly, and he questioned him as soon as he opened his mouth. Suddenly, everyone had a strange look in their eyes. Why did it seem like the ninth emperors hated Jingyu? Look at that expression. I forgot to eat. Jingyu pouted and sat down beside Xiao Chun without waiting for him to say anything. She picked up the wine glass on Xiao Chen's table and smelled it. Why is your wine different from mine? Jingyu carefully took a sip. I brought it myself. Xiao Chen looked at Jingyu's actions, and the corners of his mouth curled up slightly. Did Jingyu's actions just now count as an indirect kiss? Pfft. You actually brought your own wine to a banquet? Jingyu's eyes widened, and she laughed hysterically. Xiao Chen's face turned ugly, and he said unhappily, Is it very funny? Cough, cough, cough. Jingyu waved her hands and said, It's not funny. It's not funny. Everyone's eyes widened when they saw the two laughing and fooling around. Didn't the legends say that the ninth emperor's was cold? Was he serious in speech and manner? Although this seemed to be the case, why did they feel that Jingyu was being so presumptuous? But the ninth emperors didn't seem to be angry at all. Instead, he seemed to be pampering her. Could it be that they were seeing things? I'm tired from playing. I'm going home. What are you still doing here? Jingyu tugged at Xiao Chen's sleeve and said, Okay, let's go home. Xiao Chen raised his eyebrows and stood up. Oh yeah. Jingyu cheered and stood up. Xiao Chen casually bid farewell to everyone and held Jingyu's hand as they walked out of the hall, leaving everyone behind in deep thought. Chapter 375. Once Xiao Chen left, the others naturally didn't stay any longer and dispersed one after another. Jingyu got into the carriage and lay down comfortably on the soft couch. Xiao Chen leaned against the wall of the carriage and narrowed his eyes at Jingyu's unsightly lying posture. A faint smile appeared in his eyes. It's over. I ate too much. Jingyu crawled towards Xiao Chen in discomfort. She lifted Xiao Chen's hand from his lap and unceremoniously laid her head on Xiao Chen's lap. Did the Prime Minister's residence mistreat you? Xiao Chen narrowed his eyes and gently placed his hand on Jingyu's stomach as he asked, No, I just couldn't help but eat when I saw something delicious. In the end, I accidentally ate too much. Jingyu helplessly pouted, but her words made Xiao Chen not know whether to laugh or cry. Was what you said at the banquet today true? Xiao Chen's hand paused as he looked at Jingyu and asked, What do you mean true or false? Jingyu didn't care as she pursed her lips and said, You underestimate me too much. Do you think such a small matter can stump me? That is to say, you can really solve that chess game? Xiao Chen's eyes lit up slightly as he lowered his head to look at Jingyu, who was lying on his lap. There was some surprise in his eyes, but he didn't show it. In the depths of his eyes, there was a hint of scrutiny. Don't worry, such a childish thing can't be any simpler. Jingyu grinned and said, But I still need to put in some effort. You have to find me a child above the age of 10. It's best if he can read and not be too silly. Xiao Chen's face darkened. What did she mean by not being too silly? Wei Ling, Mu Qinghua, and the others were all shocked when Xiao Chen brought Jingyu back to the prince's residence. In the embassy, they all sent their own people to investigate Jingyu. They were extremely curious. Who was Jingyu? What was so great about her relationship with the ninth emperors? There wasn't much difficulty in finding out about Jingyu. She was the fiancée of the ninth emperors. This piece of news shocked Wei Ling and Mu Qinghua. In the courtyard of the embassy, Mu Qinghua looked at the introduction of Jingyu and raised her eyebrows slightly as she said with surprise, A woman brought back from the Roman forest? She can actually make Grey Wolf to listen to her? She is indeed not simple. Brother. That damned woman. She is actually Xiao Chen's fiancée. Mu Xiaoya's face was red with anger. She stomped her feet and said, Then what should I do? Brother, you have to think of a way to kill this woman. Shut up, Mu Qinghua shouted coldly. She stared at Mu Xiaoya with a pair of cold eyes and said, Is it because I have spoiled you too much? This is Tokyo, not Nanli. You better know your place. If you ruin this consort's grand plan, even if you're my younger sister, I definitely won't let you off easily. Mu Qinghua's eyes were as cold as a poisonous snake's as she said this. She looked at Mu Xiaoya with a murderous gaze. In Mu Qinghua's eyes, there was no such thing as bloodline.
What he wanted was supreme power. Otherwise, why would he eliminate all his brothers and become the crown prince of the Eastern Palace? Mu Xiaoya could only say that she was too lucky. She was a princess and not a prince. Moreover, father and mother doted on Mu Xiaoya. That was why Mu Qinghua didn't do anything to Mu Xiaoya. After all, she was someone who couldn't threaten him. It didn't matter whether she was alive or dead. Chapter 376. Yes. Mu Xiaoya lowered her head in fear and said, I know. Get out. Mu Qinghua scolded unceremoniously. Mu Xiaoya didn't dare to say a word and quickly ran out of the room. She couldn't help but feel wronged. Before Mu Qinghua became the crown prince, he was very good to her and never said a harsh word to her. However, she didn't know what happened later. Her brothers died one after another. Now, she only had one brother left, but he no longer doted on her like before. Mu Xiaoya hid in her room. Tears flowed out of her eyes uncontrollably. She wiped them away, and then they flowed out again. She told herself over and over again that she couldn't cry. Her brother didn't like her crying. If she cried, he would get angry. Xiao Chun did find a child in the prince's mansion, but this child was different. Xiao Chun, where did you find this child? Jingyu stared in shock at the child who was kneeling on the ground covered in dirt. His face was covered in mud, and all she could see was a pair of round eyes staring at her. Jingyu stared at the child in front of her in shock and was instantly stunned. I found him on the road. Xiao Chun calmly replied. You're strong. Jingyu stared at Xiao Chun. Was this little beggar really educated? Ahem. Little friend, tell me, what's your name? Jingyu coughed and walked toward the child. She revealed what she thought was a very kind smile and asked the child, Your smile is so ugly. Who would have thought that the child would stare at Jingyu for a long time and then spit out such a sentence? Jingyu was immediately dumbfounded. Ha ha. Ha ha ha. Jingyu laughed foolishly. She pointed at the child and asked Xiao Chun, What did he say? He didn't say anything, right? Am I hallucinating? Damn it. How dare you say I'm ugly? Do you think I won't beat you up? Jingyu immediately went berserk. She glared at the child fiercely. Even uglier. Who would have thought that this child would calmly spit out those 3 words? In that instant, Jingyu felt as though she had been struck by lightning. Take him down to wash up and change his clothes. Xiao Chen's tone was full of laughter. He waved at Interrogation Officer 1, and Interrogation Officer 1 left with the child as instructed. Jingyu's face was flushed red. She rolled up her sleeves, looking like she couldn't take it anymore and wanted to beat someone up. She wanted to chase after Interrogation Officer 1, but Xiao Chen hugged her from behind. You. Let go of me. If I don't beat that stinking brat to death today, I won't eat. Jingyu couldn't stop struggling. Her words made Xiao Chen's face turn black. Where did you pick him up from? He's simply more infuriating than you. Jingyu glared at Xiao Chen angrily as she spoke. Xiao Chen narrowed his eyes and looked dangerously at Jingyu. Cough, cough, cough. Jingyu suddenly realized that she had said something wrong. She immediately covered her mouth and blinked at Xiao Chen. She giggled and said, No, I meant that he can't compare to you. Who are you? The 9 emperors. Xiao Chen felt a strange feeling when he heard Jingyu's explanation. What did she mean by can't compare? Does that mean that I'm more infuriating than he is? Jingyu's non-stop rambling disrupted Xiao Chen's train of thought. After laughing and joking for a long time, they finally saw Interrogation Officer 1 leading a boy who had already changed his clothes and walked over. He had a very thin and weak body and wore a gray robe. He seemed to be very unused to it and pulled at his own clothes with a cold face. Chapter 377. Jingyu spat out her tea when she saw the child walk in. This is the brat from just now? Jingyu's eyes widened as she stared at the child standing in front of her. Her baby face was so adorable. Humph, ugly woman. The boy turned his head away arrogantly, as if he didn't want to look at Jingyu.
This made Jingyu grit her teeth in anger. However, such an adorable child was behaving so arrogantly. Oh my! Ambulance! Ambulance! I can't take it anymore. What's your name? Xiao Qin's lips curled up slightly as he looked at the child indifferently. My name is Yijun. When the child heard Xiao Qin's question, his attitude changed 360 degrees. His uneasy gaze and his blushing face made him look like a young daughter-in-law meeting her in-laws for the first time. Yijun? Good name. Xiao Qin nodded calmly. It was obviously a casual compliment, but the child looked as if he had received a great reward. His face turned even redder, and the way he looked at Xiao Qin made Jingyu grit her teeth in anger. Why is this happening? Why? The difference was too obvious. Could it be that such a young child was actually gay? Jingyu looked at Xiao Qin and Yijun with a strange expression. The image of a man against another man in her mind made Jingyu shudder violently. Do you know why this king asked you to come? Xiao Qin narrowed his eyes slightly as he looked at Yijun and asked. I know. This woman promised the crown prince of Nanli to solve the chess game. 3 days ago, a child solved the game. That child was me, Yijun said seriously. Yijun said seriously. The fluency of his speech almost didn't need to be verified. This child was very smart. Very good. Xiao Qin smiled and said, for the next 3 days, you will stay with her and learn how to solve the game. This king can't solve it, but I believe she can. I believe you can learn it. Yes, I will. Hearing this, Yijun's eyes lit up. In the end, he nodded firmly. Jingyu brought the child back to the lotus garden. Along the way, the child did not say a single word to Jingyu. He had a cold expression on his face. He was simply a replica of Xiao Qin. Jingyu glared at Yijun and said, This is your room. You will live here from now on. This is Big Sisterine Xiao. If you need anything, just tell Big Sisterine Xiao. Do you understand? Ugly woman, don't talk to me in such an idiotic tone. I'm not an idiot. Yijun shook his head proudly and burrowed into his room, leaving behind a flustered Jingyu and a stunned Yin Xiao. The two of them looked at each other. The next morning, while Jingyu was still sleeping, she heard chaotic howls coming from outside the room. Jingyu angrily covered herself with the blanket and burrowed under the blanket again. Finally, the noise was quieter. However, just as Jingyu thought it was over, she suddenly felt something tugging at her blanket. Ugly woman, get up quickly. Get up quickly. Yijun angrily tugged at Jingyu's blanket. Don't be so noisy. Let me sleep for a while more. Jingyu rolled up the blanket and burrowed her head under it. This made Yijun so angry that he was panting. Ugly woman, get up quickly. If you don't get up, I will splash water on you. Yijun's eyes saw the water bottle at the side and immediately shouted. Chapter 378. Go ahead. Jingyu was in a daze and didn't care. She answered casually and went back to sleep. However, in the next second, the cold water made Jingyu jump up abruptly. She stood on the bed with a look of horror. She looked at the cute baby beside the bed who was holding the kettle and blinking at her. You little brat. I'll chop you up. Jingyu chased after Yijun fiercely. Oh, Sisterine Xiao, save me. The ugly woman has become a crazy woman. The earth-shattering screams early in the morning caused the prince's mansion to become noisy. Jingyu was woken up by Yijun as she wished and officially started teaching. These symbols are called numbers. Read it as 1, which is our current word, 1. This is 2, and the current word is 2. Jingyu patiently wrote down the numbers with a charcoal pencil. She let Yijun recognize the numbers from 1 to 9 first. Using arithmetic, as long as you can make the total number of the horizontal, vertical, and oblique sides of the grid equal to 15, until all the numbers on the chessboard are added together without missing anything, then the game will be solved. Your task today is to distinguish these symbols from the corresponding words. I'll check later. Jingyu repeated the numbers to Yijun to make sure that he remembered them. Yijun nodded and began to recite them seriously. Jingyu stretched and walked around. Sometimes, she ran to the kitchen to play. Suddenly, She thought of making something to eat. She instructed the chef to make octopus balls. Then, she happily carried the octopus balls to Ijun's room. How is it? Are you done? Jingyu smiled as she placed the food on Ijun's table and said, I personally instructed you. Come and try it. What is this? Ijun looked at it curiously. Then, he widened his eyes and said, It's the get-rich octopus balls. How do you know how to make them? Oh, you know about this? Jingyu casually sat down and said, This is my invention. Hurry up and try it. Oh, I got it. Ijun's eyes widened as though he had just been enlightened. Actually, that you can come here restaurant is not the property of the 9 emperors at all, right? It's yours. Not bad, not bad. You're quite smart. Jingyu smiled as she looked at Ijun and nodded. The restaurant is mine. The 9 emperors are just a cover. Are you going to eat or not? If you don't want to eat, then I'll eat. Eat. Who says I'm not eating? Ijun hurriedly pressed down the meatball with one hand and was about to eat it happily. Suddenly, he seemed to have thought of something. He looked at Jingyu defensively and said, Why are you giving it to me? Is there anything you want me to do? Ijun looked at Jingyu with some vigilance. She was clearly such a young child, but she had such thoughts. Yes. Jingyu nodded. Hearing this, Ijun's face turned ugly. He lowered his hand and said, What do you want me to do? What else can we do? Memorize the book after eating. This concerns my brain. Jingyu stood up and said, Hurry up and eat. Memorize the book after eating. Got it? After she finished speaking, Jingyu strode away like a boss. She did not look at Ijun's shocked and incredulous expression. Ijun looked at Jingyu's departing figure and then looked at the meatball on the table. He did not know why, but he suddenly felt a lump in his throat and an inexplicable warmth rose in his heart. Chapter 379. An inexplicable warmth rose in her heart. Ijun was very smart. He familiarized himself with the numbers in just one morning. Jingyu praised him endlessly. Then, she asked Ijun to do the math. Fortunately, Ijun had studied math before, but he wasn't proficient. Jingyu explained it again, and Ijun completely understood. It's actually very simple. Jingyu looked at Ijun, who was doing the math, and said, I've already solved the game. I just need to tell you how to make the next move. You just need to memorize the number of moves, and we'll win. Hearing this, Ijun looked up at Jingyu in confusion. I'm saying that you don't have to work so hard to solve it yourself. You just need to memorize the number of moves. Jingyu shrugged and said, With your smart brain, memorizing this should be easy. Why do you have to do the math yourself? It's tiring, isn't it? No. Ijun rejected her without thinking. His little face was filled with determination. He glared at Jingyu and said, I will definitely solve it myself. I don't want you to do it. Ijun looked at Jingyu angrily, then buried his head and continued to calculate. Jingyu raised her eyebrows in surprise and shrugged. To make it easier for Ijun to solve the game, Xiaoqin specially asked someone to make a chessboard. It was made exactly like the chessboard that Nanli had sent over. He even used a wooden block to write numbers on it, so that Ijun could solve it faster. For 2 consecutive days, Jingyu didn't seem to have anything to do. Every morning, when she woke up, she saw Ijun sitting in the courtyard with a chessboard. He had a brush in his hand and was scribbling something. He seemed to be doing math in a low voice. At night, every time Xiao Chun came to the lotus garden, he would see Ijun doing the math. Jingyu and Xiao Chun both sighed in admiration when they saw Ijun's diligent appearance. Such determination and tenacity were extremely rare. However, Jingyu didn't stay idle for the past 2 days. She suddenly thought of something fun, so she asked Xiao Chun to find something and a carpenter to make it. Ijun was also doing the math. Meanwhile, Jingyu was tinkering with all sorts of strange things. In the blink of an eye, the deadline given by Nanli was 3 days away. However, Ijun didn't seem to be able to calculate it. What surprised Jingyu was that this child's temperament was really very good. He had already reached this point, but Ijun didn't show the slightest impatience. He was already patiently calculating step by step. Tomorrow was the day to enter the palace. Jingyu looked at Ijun,
who was still calculating. A faint smile appeared at the corner of her mouth. She turned around, entered the room, and fell asleep. Jingyu was even less anxious. It seemed that she was certain that Ijuan would be able to solve the game. In Xiao was extremely anxious. Every time, she would use the excuse of bringing tea and water to see Jun, but she didn't dare to disturb him. If she was disturbed and something went wrong, it would be over. The next morning, Jingyu was still sleeping when she was woken up by earth-shattering shouts. I know, ugly woman, quickly wake up. Ijun's voice rang in Jingyu's ears. She didn't need to think to know that this little brat had barged into her room again. After the incident of water splashing last time, Jingyu had learned her lesson. She sat up groggily and rubbed her eyes. What do you know? Jingyu yawned loudly without caring about her image. She rubbed her sleepy eyes and stared at Ijun as she asked. Chapter 380. I know the secret of this chess game. Ijun looked at Jingyu excitedly and said, It's actually very simple. As long as you master it, there are countless ways to break it. This chess game is simply too exquisite, too magical. It's even too simple. Jingyu stared at Ijun, who was about to go crazy, and her face was filled with black lines. It's over. This child has gone crazy. Quick, quick, quick. Let's go to the palace and break the chess game. Ijun came forward and grabbed Jingyu's hand as he shook it. Io, little ancestor, what time is it now? Jingyu wailed and said, Let me sleep a little longer. Last night, I was worried that my head would fall off and I had nightmares all night. Let me sleep a little longer. Jingyu said as she moved her body and burrowed under the blanket again. Ijun was slightly stunned when he heard this. He looked at Jingyu, who had burrowed under the blanket again, and hesitated for a moment. He raised his hand and poked Jingyu's blanket and said, Why do you believe that I can solve the chess game? Aren't you afraid that your head will fall off before I can solve it? Little brat, have you forgotten that you ate my octopus balls? Jingyu poked her head out from under the blanket and stared at Ijun as she said, And you're so smart? Who else can I trust if not you? After saying this, Jingyu reached out and rubbed Ijun's little head. The bright smile on her face stunned Ijun for a moment. Then, his eyes curved into crescents as he broke into a smile. Ayaya, it feels so good to the touch. Jingyu rubbed Ijun's head and suddenly had the urge to pull Ijun into her arms. With this thought, Jingyu did just that. Ijun suddenly bumped into Jingyu's arms. His whole body trembled and his face was filled with astonishment. Then, he heard Jingyu's voice and his face suddenly darkened. He bared his fangs and brandished his claws as he struggled and shouted, You ugly woman! Let go of this young master! Early in the morning, there were sounds of panic. At the door, In Xiao held her forehead as she looked at the two people who were messing around. She was speechless. 3 days later, Jingyu entered the palace with Ijun. Everyone already knew of Ijun's identity. A child picked up by the 9 emperors could really solve the Go puzzle? Not only did the people of Nanli not believe it, but even the officials of Tokyo didn't believe it. Originally, he thought that the 9th emperors would find a very smart child who was good at studying. He didn't expect them to find a little beggar to answer the questions. If he answered correctly, it would be a slap to Nanli's face. But if he answered incorrectly, it would be a slap to the Tokyo. In the Great Hall, the chessboard was brought up once again. Envoys from various countries gathered in the hall. Jingyu and Ijun followed the 9th emperors and arrived late. What the hell was this? You would have to ask Jingyu. She only arrived after arguing with Ijun for half a day. It seems that Miss Jingyu really brought a child to solve the Go puzzle. Mu Qinghua sat on his seat and looked at Jingyu holding Ijun's hand as they walked in. A faint smile appeared in his eyes and his face was full of mockery. Since I've promised, I'll naturally do it. Jingyu nodded faintly. I heard that this child is a beggar picked up by the 9th emperors? Mu Qinghua's gaze landed on Ijun. He looked quite handsome, but he was still a child. So what if he's a beggar? Jingyu frowned and looked at Mu Qinghua. In our Tokyo, Even a little beggar can solve the Go puzzle. In your big Nanli, no one can solve it. I really don't know what to say about you. Crown Prince Mu, you should stop talking. Oh my God, it's really been solved. Everyone stood up with a look of surprise, and their eyes fell on Ijun, who was sitting on the high seat. Kacha, Kacha. A series of cracking sounds were heard. Ijun stood up and took a step back. The chessboard on the stone platform seemed to have broken free from some kind of restraint. The chessboard cracked from the middle and slowly moved to the sides under everyone's astonished gaze. Ijun also looked at the situation in front of him in surprise. Jingyu quickly stood up and walked forward. She lowered her head and looked at the item on the chessboard. It was a pitch-black box. Puzzled, Jingyu reached out and took it out. Then, she closed the chessboard. Chapter 382. What is this thing? Jingyu examined it for a bit. It was just an ordinary box, but the material was not ordinary. It was actually not damaged after so long. Everyone stretched their necks and watched as Jingyu opened the box. Inside the box was something like a scroll. Jingyu raised her hand and unfolded the scroll. However, when she unfolded it, a layer of dust came out. There was nothing on it. What is this? Jingyu was stunned. Looking at the blank scroll, she suddenly felt like she was being played. Cough, cough, cough. Mu Qinghua was also stunned for a long time. So this thing that was wrapped so tightly was just a blank scroll? Emperor, this? Jingyu spread her hands and said to Xiaoyi, in any case, it's still an antique. Emperor, do you want it? If you don't want it, then give it to Ijuan to draw for fun. Hearing this, Xiaoye's face darkened. He helplessly waved his hand and said, Take it, take it. Thank you, Emperor. Jingyu happily pulled Ijuan down the stage and sat down. She smiled at Mu Qinghua and said, Crown Prince Mu, I did it. This game of chess has been solved. You should also fulfill your bet. Regarding the ceding of the sea south of Nanli, you should discuss it with the Emperor. Hee. Tokyo is really full of talents. Mu Qinghua's face was very ugly. When Jingyu mentioned the bet, his face became even uglier. Ha ha ha. Jingyu, Shin really didn't misjudge you. Xiaoyi laughed loudly and said, You've done so much for Tokyo. What reward do you want? Reward. Jingyu rolled her eyes and looked at Xiaoyi with a smile. Your Majesty, you know that I am very interested in business. If your Majesty wants to reward me, can you give me a pass? In the future, Jingyu's caravan will be able to travel freely in our Tokyo. Oh? Xiaoyi raised his eyebrows with interest and said faintly, Jin has heard of your restaurants. If it's just a Tokyo, then there's no problem. Jin will allow it. Thank you, Your Majesty. May Your Majesty live for 10,000 years. Jingyu thanked the Emperor from the bottom of her heart. Unimpeded, this was a huge matter. In the future, Jingyu's business could be opened all over Tokyo. How could she not be excited? Between Jingyu and Xiaoyi, one was asking for a reward, while the other was agreeing. This kind of behavior made Mu Qinghua's expression turn uglier and uglier. However, she still endured it and said a few words to smooth things over with a smile. Then, she said to Xiaoyi, Your Majesty, actually, other than sending gifts, Nanli, came here this time for a more important matter. Oh? What matter is so important to Crown Prince Mu? Xiaoye's eyes flashed. He knew that something big was about to happen. This matter is related to my little sister. Naturally, this prince will treat it with great importance. Mu Qinghua smiled faintly and said, Your Majesty, my Nanli and Tokyo are the closest to each other. We are indebted to the Emperor for taking care of us for so many years. Moreover, my little sister, Princess Xiaoyu, has reached the marriageable age. Therefore, I want to make a marriage alliance with the Tokyo to improve the relationship between our two countries. What does Your Majesty think? Mu Qinghua stood up and spoke with the aura of a prince. Then,
He smiled and asked Xiao Yi. Chapter 383. Ha ha ha. It is exactly what I want for Nanli to have such thoughts. However, which of my sons does Princess Xiaoye wish to marry? Xiaoye's words were quite clear. A marriage alliance was a good thing, but the person to be married to would naturally be one of his sons. Your Majesty, Princess Xiaoye is the only princess in Nanli. Her status cannot be weak. Moreover, my little sister has been unable to forget the sight of the ninth emperors for a long time. Thus, the person to be married to this marriage alliance is not one of the princes, but the ninth emperors, Xiao Qian. Mu Qinghua's words left the hall silent. Xiaoye's expression changed, but he still concealed it. He chuckled and said to Mu Qinghua, Crown Prince Mu, you may not know this, but the position of the ninth emperor's first wife has already been decided. Princess Xiaoye's status is noble and naturally cannot be a concubine. Why don't we change the person for this marriage alliance? Your Majesty, the candidate for the ninth emperor's first wife you mentioned is her, right? Mu Xiaoye stood up and pointed at Jingyu arrogantly. Yes. Xiaoye's brows twitched as he nodded. You are Jingyu, right? Mu Xiaoye lifted her chin and looked at Jingyu. You are only the daughter of a minister. This princess is the princess of Nanli. Now, I want to be the concubine of the ninth emperors. You voluntarily withdraw and give up the position of the ninth imperial concubine. These words were said so confidently that Jing Yu's eyes widened in shock. She looked at Mu Xiaoye strangely. Crown Prince Mu. Jing Yu coughed and said, Hurry and bring your princess back for treatment. She will not be able to make it if her illness is not treated soon. What? Jing Yu's words stunned Mu Qinghua and Xiao Yi. Sigh. Why is your brain so slow at such a young age? Jing Yu sighed and said, In the land of Tokyo, Nanli is nothing. So what if she was a princess? I will definitely be the ninth imperial concubine. Bite me if you don't like it. He actually wants me to withdraw. Sigh. This child is really sick. After Jing Yu finished speaking, everyone's expression became strange. However, Helian Theo's eyes were smiling as he laughed out loud. Mu Qinghua immediately turned her head and glared at Helian Theo. Wei Ling also raised his eyebrows in amusement. Jing Yu, how dare you insult me? Mu Xiaoye's face was livid as she glared at Jing Yu. Nonsense. When did I insult you? Jing Yu's face suddenly turned serious as she said seriously, I was clearly speaking the truth. Sigh. I can't even speak the truth. How can I live like this? You. Mu Xiaoye's face turned red. Jing Yu's playful manner made everyone feel extremely uncomfortable, trying to hold back their laughter. Xiao Chun, who was beside her, also had a happy expression. Xiao Yi also had a faint smile in his eyes, but he still pretended to cough. Jing Yu. Chapter 384. Jing Yu was unhappy. What does this have to do with being the first consort of the ninth emperors? All right. Xiao Yi raised his hand and interrupted Jing Yu. He frowned and looked at Mu Xiaoye, then turned to Jing Yu. Finally, he sighed and said to Mu Qinghua, Crown Prince Mu, how about we change the candidate for this marriage? Your Majesty, you have seen my little sister's determination. She will not marry anyone other than the ninth emperors. Mu Qinghua smiled and said, Why don't we do as my little sister suggested? Let Jing Yu compete with my little sister. The loser will automatically withdraw. That is indeed a good idea. Xiao Yi nodded and looked at Jing Yu. Jing Yu, what do you think? Jing Yu's mouth twitched. It was obvious that Xiao Yi was just asking for a formality. It didn't matter if Jing Yu agreed or not. Jing Yu could only nod in agreement. Mu Xiaoye proudly lifted her chin and looked at Jing Yu with disdain. Since it is a competition between the ninth imperial concubine, then it should be a competition between the four arts. Xiao Yi smiled faintly and said, Your Majesty,
I feel that the four arts alone won't reflect anything. What kind of person is the ninth emperor's? Since she is worthy of the ninth emperor's, then she must be proficient in both the arts. I feel that the martial arts competition should be held as well. Mu Qinghua's eyes flashed with a scheming smile as he squinted at Xiaoyi. Both of you are women. I don't think this is appropriate, right? Xiaoye's gaze fell on Mu Xiaoye and Jingyu. I am not afraid. If you want to compete, then bring it on. Mu Xiaoye said arrogantly. Jingyu rolled her eyes as if she was looking at an idiot. Since both of you don't have any questions, why don't we settle it like this? Mu Qinghua smiled faintly and said, Jingyu and my sister will each choose one of the four arts to compete in. Your Majesty, why don't you choose the martial arts test? All right. Xiaoyi nodded. Jingyu, I want to compete with you. Mu Xiaoye shouted at Jingyu impatiently. I choose Go. Jingyu said weakly. She looked like she lacked confidence. In fact, Jingyu felt that it was too boring and she was not interested at all. All right, the 2 rounds have been decided. Your Majesty, how about another combat test? Mu Qinghua turned to look at Xiaoyi, who was sitting on the high seat. Coincidentally, a horse merchant bought a few wild horses from the distant desert a few days ago. They have yet to be tamed, and even the horse trainers in the palace are unable to tame them. The last round will be horse taming. If the 2 of you can tame these wild horses, then you will definitely be worthy of the 9th emperor's. Xiaoyi said with a faint smile in his eyes. In fact, Xiaoye's original intention was that if the horse trainers were unable to tame these wild horses, then the 2 of them definitely would not be able to do it either. Then, wouldn't a peaceful ending be perfect? Your Majesty, this combat test is just right. Let's use horse taming. Mu Qinghua smiled faintly and said, 2 out of 3 rounds. The loser will automatically withdraw from the competition. Do you agree? No problem. Mu Xiaoye agreed without hesitation. Jingyu yawned and nodded faintly. Xiaoyi immediately announced that the competition would begin in 3 days. These 3 days were for the 2 of them to prepare. After the palace banquet ended, the news of Jingyu and Nanli's princess, Mu Xiaoye's competition spread like wildfire. When they found out that it was to compete for the position of the 9th emperor's first wife, everyone's eyes lit up with interest. Chapter 385. As expected of the 9th emperor's, all his love affairs had gone to other countries. The imperial city was once again in an uproar. Not sure if it was because someone had stirred it up or if these people were just bored, they actually set up a gambling house in the middle of the street to bet on who would win. For a moment, the imperial city was bustling with noise and excitement. Those women who admired the 9th emperor's also started to place their bets. What? Only a quarter of the people bet on me? Jingyu, who was in the prince's residence, simply went berserk when she heard the news. Ugly woman, don't be sad. This young master has bet 1 tael of silver on you. You will win. Yijun patted Jingyu's shoulder like a little adult and said solemnly. Jingyu's face darkened, and she suddenly had the urge to beat someone up. Was she that unpopular? This was a Tokyo after all. She was a proper Tokyo. Only 1 day had passed, and the number of people who bet on Jingyu's loss had already increased to 5 to 1. Jingyu, who was in the prince's residence, gritted her teeth in anger and finally couldn't take it anymore. She waved her hand and ordered all the restaurants, shops, and other businesses to place their bets. The effect was obvious. But the most infuriating thing was that Xiao Jingran also went to place his bets, and he actually bet on Mu Xiaoye. Moreover, he bet 1,000 taels of silver. Xiao Jingran, you traitor. Jingyu completely went berserk. Imperial concubine, the crown prince, also placed his bet. Yin Xiao spoke again. He also bet 1,000 taels of gold on you. The crown prince? Jingyu blinked and immediately thought of Xiao Chun. Could it be that Xiao Chun asked the crown prince to place his bet? She didn't seem to have any relationship with the crown prince, so this was the only possibility. Yes. Yin Xiao nodded and said,
Cebu and northern pastoral countries also participated. They both bet on Princess Xiaoya. The Ninth Emperors and young Master Fong also bet on you. The corners of Jing Yu's mouth twitched. Why did she feel that a gamble had turned into a battlefield with the addition of these people? Jing Yu was in the prince's residence with a conflicted expression. The gambling outside was getting bigger and bigger. In the end, it became a battle between the crown prince and Xiao Jingran. However, at this moment, the Ninth Emperor suddenly sent a message asking them to lower the odds again. On the third day, the score had become 10-1. Jing Yu was in tears. At this moment, Heli and Theo suddenly switched sides and bet 3,000 taels on Jing Yu. The 9 emperors also bet a few thousand taels. If Jing Yu were to win, the bet would be increased tenfold. This amount of 10 million taels was really enough to make anyone jealous. In these 3 days, Jing Yu only ate and slept. She was not in the mood for the competition at all. Yijun sighed every day. Sigh. My 1 tael of silver was wasted. Before leaving, Yijun sighed again. He was immediately beaten up by Jing Yu, who was in a state of hidden bitterness. Then, he followed the 9th Imperial Uncle's carriage out of the door and arrived at the location of the competition. The competition venue was outside the palace. The raised platform was the stage where Jing Yu and Mu Xiaoya would be performing. There were also chairs below, where the famous scholars and teachers sat. Fang Zicheng's father, Fang Yuanliang, was among them. Grand Tutor Fu Yan was also among them. However, there was one person among them that surprised Jing Yu. The old man sitting in the middle had his eyes closed. Wasn't this the old man that Jing Yu and Shangguan Linglan had met on the way to Baofeng Temple? Chapter 386. It was the old man who had brought his child to seek medical treatment. Xiao Chun. Who is that person sitting in the middle? Jing Yu asked curiously as she looked at Xiao Chun. Su He, old Mr. Su from Jiangnan. He is a renowned scholar. More than half of the court officials have been taught by old Mr. Su. The emperor had also studied under old Mr. Su for 3 months. He is today's chief examiner. Xiao Chen's gaze landed on the old man as he said faintly, Jing Yu's eyes widened. So this old man is so powerful. Jing Yu and Mu Xiaoya had arrived. On the stage, a middle-aged man acted as the MC and announced the process of the competition. Behind him, a group of guards carried a table up and laid out a brush, ink, paper, and inkstone. As the MC announced the competition, Jing Yu and Mu Xiaoya slowly walked up the stage. Jing Yu, you are going to lose. Mu Xiaoya snorted arrogantly and said to Jing Yu, boring. Jing Yu rolled her eyes and spat out 2 words. She then sat down on her seat and stared at the ink, paper, and inkstone. Her shoulders slumped. Why is it a brush again? The time limit is 4 hours. After the MC announced, a disc was carried up. It was the disc used to record time. There was a stick on it, and below it was the time. With the rotation of the sun, one would know the time. The competition had officially begun. Mu Xiaoya picked up the brush and started painting. Her focused expression was exceptionally pleasing to the eyes. On the other hand, Jing Yu was still in a daze. Jing Yu raised her hand to pick up the brush, but put it down again. Jing Lang and Shangguan Linglan, who were watching from the sidelines, were extremely anxious. Jing Yu hesitated for a long time. In the end, she raised her hand and called the MC over. She whispered a few words to the MC and finally nodded under the MC's strange gaze. Everyone was confused. Not long after, they saw a guard carrying a pot of charcoal over and placing it beside Jing Yu. Jing Yu immediately beamed with joy and nodded to the MC. Under everyone's surprised gaze, she picked up the black charcoal and began to whittle it in front of everyone. She whittled it into the shape of a brush and then began to paint. While she was painting, she looked up from time to time. Everyone finally realized what Jing Yu was looking at. Jingyu was looking at Suhee. Suhee also had a strange expression on his face. He naturally recognized Jingyu and was a little surprised. However, his surprise did not last long. Now, he saw that Jingyu was looking at him while she was painting. Could it be that Jingyu was painting a portrait of him? Thinking of this, Suhee calmed down and continued to sit quietly, allowing Jingyu to paint. Time passed quietly. Jingyu and Mu Xiaoya looked completely different when they were painting. Jingyu would occasionally reach out to wipe the paper and paint. Her black hand would casually wipe her face, and her face would instantly darken. Such a genuine expression made the surrounding spectators laugh. They suddenly felt that Jingyu was so adorable. Before 4 hours had passed, the two of them had finished painting. Jingyu finally straightened her body and looked down at her black hands silently. Her bright eyes looked around and met the gazes of Xiao Chen and Shangguan Linglan. She immediately revealed a bright smile. The first to be displayed was Mu Xiaoya's painting. It was a rather grand painting of mountains and rivers. The strength of the brush and the artistic conception revealed showed that this painting was undoubtedly a masterpiece. The few officials who came forward nodded their heads, expressing that this was an excellent piece of work. Chapter 387. No wonder Mu Xiaoya wanted to compete. She was good at it. After Mu Xiaoya finished, everyone's eyes fell on Jingyu. Everyone saw that Jingyu didn't use a brush to draw. Instead, she used the charcoal that was thrown on the ground. What would the drawing look like if she used charcoal to draw? The group of officials walked to Jingyu's side. 2 guards held up Jingyu's drawing. Everyone looked up and froze. On the white paper, there was only a human head. That person was naturally Suhee. The 3-dimensional facial features, the fine lines, and even the strands of hair could be seen clearly. This drawing skill was one of a kind. Elder Su, one of the officials said in a daze. Why are there 2 Elder Sus? Ha ha ha. Suhee laughed loudly. Everyone laughed as well. They were all impressed by Jingyu's drawing. How did you draw with charcoal? One of the officials couldn't help but ask. This? Jingyu rolled her eyes. She didn't know how to explain. Just as she was thinking about how to get away with it, she heard Suhee say, Official Zhang, this is Jingyu's teacher's matter. I'm afraid it's not appropriate for me to speak. After Suhee's words, the official called Official Zhang nodded his head in agreement. Yes, yes, yes. Your student has been rude. Official Zhang bowed. No matter how he looked at it, it was a strange scene. Suhee and Lord Zhang were about the same age, and Lord Zhang considered himself to be a student. It seemed that Suhee's reputation was not in vain. From the perspective of drawing, Princess Xiaoya has undoubtedly won this round. Jingyu, although your drawing is vivid and lifelike, but... Suhee paused. He seemed to want to say something, but he felt that it wasn't right. Thousands of thoughts ran through his mind, but he didn't know what to say. I understand. Jingyu smiled and said, I lost this round. Besides, I don't know how to draw. This drawing is a gift for Elder Su. Jingyu admitted it generously. Suhee stroked his beard and smiled when he heard Jingyu's words. He thanked Jingyu and accepted the painting without hesitation. Then, he looked at Jingyu with more affection. Mu Xiaoya heard Jingyu's response, but she couldn't feel happy. She was the one who had won in the end. But Mu Xiaoya looked at the portrait of Suhee on display. It was so charming, and it was even drawn with charcoal. No matter how she looked at it, she would never be able to draw something like this. She had never seen anyone who could draw a portrait so exquisitely. It was as if it was carved. Mu Xiaoya's drawing was good. Mu Xiaoya won this round. But outside, everyone was talking about Jingyu's drawing skills that they had never seen before. The whole morning passed. After the drawing competition, it was time for the chess competition in the afternoon. Mu Xiaoya's victory in the first round gave everyone a lot of confidence. Those who were still hesitating and didn't know who to bet on all ran to Mu Xiaoya's camp. Jingyu didn't care at all. The afternoon competition started after Jingyu finished her lunch. This time, the chess competition was held in a restaurant. This restaurant was antique and filled with the smell of books. On the second floor, there was a chessboard. Jingyu and Mu Xiaoya sat facing each other. Below them, there were many guests. Under the railing on the second floor, a huge chessboard was displayed. Servants ran up and down, in charge of checking the positions of the two and announcing the game. Chapter 388. The servants below were holding large chess pieces and playing chess on the huge chessboard for the audience to watch. Jingyu yawned out of boredom. She called the waiter over, but where did he get the melon seeds and fruits? He ate them right in front of Mu Xiaoya, without the slightest hint of nervousness. Why? In ancient times, Jingyu only knew how to play the four arts, and that was Go. When she was training as a special agent, her mentor was a top Jingyu in the country. He would play Go with her whenever he was free. Over time, Jingyu had learned all of her mentor's Go skills. She even surpassed him. Now, in Jingyu's eyes, there was really nothing to play about Go. She could tell whether a person knew how to play Go by looking at her first move. Obviously, in Jingyu's eyes, Mu Xiaoya was trash. Crack, crack. Jingyu was eating melon seeds as she stared at Mu Xiaoya. Mu Xiaoya's anxious look was particularly interesting. It's your turn. Mu Xiaoya was annoyed by the sound of Jingyu snacking on melon seeds. She thought for a while before placing a chess piece and roaring at Jingyu angrily. Jingyu rolled her eyes in boredom. She casually picked up a chess piece and placed it down as if she didn't even need to think about it. However, the position she placed down blocked the exit that Mu Xiaoya had found with great difficulty. Below the balcony, the scholars who were watching the game either exclaimed in admiration or shook their heads and sighed. Jingyu's chess skills were amazing. There was almost no need to continue watching the game. Mu Xiaoya would definitely lose the game. However, Jingyu seemed to be teasing Mu Xiaoya. Every time Mu Xiaoya was about to lose, she would find an exit and find a chance to survive. In this way, the two played for an entire afternoon. Jingyu finally finished her food. Mu Xiaoya was almost lying on the chessboard. Jingyu picked up a chess piece and said, "That's enough. You've lost." With that, Jingyu raised her hand and placed a piece. As soon as the piece was placed, all the white pieces on the chessboard were killed. There was no chance of survival. Jingyu stood up calmly and stretched. Under everyone's dumbfounded gaze, she slowly walked downstairs. When Xiaochen arrived at the building, he had just finished watching the game. His eyes were filled with surprise. Such an exquisite design and a relentless encirclement. Xiaochen knew that it was impossible for him to beat Jingyu's Go skills. As he was thinking, he saw Jingyu walking down the stairs towards him. Her unhappy expression made Xiaochen raise his eyebrows. The food in this restaurant doesn't taste good. Who would have thought that Jingyu would complain about the food as soon as she opened her mouth? Xiaochen was silent for a moment before saying, "I'll take you to eat something delicious." "Okay," Jingyu answered excitedly. She followed Xiaochen away under the dumbfounded gaze of the crowd behind her. Mu Xiaoya was just walking down the stairs. She looked at the two of them walking away hand in hand with a complicated expression. She had lost this game with shame. In fact, Mu Xiaoya knew that if Jingyu wanted to, she could defeat her within half an hour. However, Jingyu held back again and again, giving her a chance to live. If this continued, she would have lost the entire game. Mu Xiaoya had to admit that she had lost this game very convincingly. Her Go skills were not as good as Jingyu's Go skills. After a whole day of competition, Jingyu returned to her room after eating and drinking to her heart's content. She excitedly talked about what she heard outside. Jingyu's chess skills were sought after by all kinds of scholars. They all asked Jingyu to give them some pointers.
Chapter 389. Jingyu's chess skills were sought after by all sorts of scholars, and they all requested Jingyu to give them some pointers. Her carving-like drawing skills were even more astonishing. There were even people who went to Suhi's residence to take another look at the portrait. In an instant, Jingyu's fame rose again. That night, Jingyu hugged the Tokyo Chronicles of the Annals of the Grand Historian and read it with great interest. After flipping through it for a long time, Jingyu couldn't find any information about the unusual pupils. She had no choice but to flip through the records of the continent again, but she still couldn't find anything. When Xiaoqin entered the room, he saw Jingyu hugging a book and reading it. "What are you doing?" Xiaoqin stood behind Jingyu and asked faintly. "Aya." Jingyu jumped in fright and almost bit her own tongue. She turned to stare at Xiaoqin and said, "Why are you walking so silently? You scared me to death." Xiaoqin raised his eyebrows as he sat beside Jingyu. He lowered his head to look at the open book and said faintly, "When did you start to care so much about the matters of the continent? Can't I just watch and play?" She covered the book in her hand and put it aside. She climbed onto the bed on all fours and muttered, "Time to sleep, time to sleep. I'm so sleepy. I've been busy all day." Xiaoqin looked helplessly at Jingyu, who had crawled into bed, but didn't say anything. His gaze fell on the book, and a different expression flashed across his eyes. It was the same night, but in a different place with a different person. "Trash!" Mu Qinghua shouted angrily. Mu Xiaoya, who was standing in front of her, lowered her head in fear and didn't dare to say a word. "You can't even beat Jingyu. Useless." Mu Qinghua spun in a circle on the spot, her eyes filled with anxiety. Mu Xiaoya didn't dare to move an inch under the pressure of her anger. The atmosphere in the room was oppressive. At this moment, a voice came from outside. "Your Highness, there's a man in black outside asking for an audience. He claims to be your Highness' friend." Mu Qinghua heard the voice of the guard at the door. Mu Qinghua paused and a look of doubt flashed in her eyes. "Friend? Please come in." After some consideration, Mu Qinghua still invited him in. A person wearing a black cloak stood in front of Mu Qinghua. Her figure was slightly petite, and her exposed hands told Mu Qinghua that this person was obviously a woman. "Greetings to Crown Prince Mu." A clear voice rang out. The person in the cloak slowly raised her head, revealing the face hidden under the brim of the hat. A gentle face with delicate cheeks. Wasn't this person Jing Yin? Mu Qinghua's eyes flashed with surprise. Clearly, Mu Qinghua didn't expect the person to be Jing Yin. "If I didn't remember wrongly, you are the granddaughter of the Prime Minister's concubine, Jing Yin?" Mu Qinghua looked at Jing Yin and said faintly, "Haha, Crown Prince Mu has a good memory." When Jing Yin heard the word concubine, anger flashed in her eyes, but she still lowered her eyes and answered, "May I know why Miss Jing Yin is here in the middle of the night?" Mu Qinghua didn't care about Jing Yin at all. With his status as the crown prince, he really didn't care about a minister's daughter. Moreover, she was the daughter of a concubine, even though she was quite pretty. "I'm here for Princess Xiaoya," Jing Yin said with a faint smile in her eyes. She turned to look at Mu Xiaoya and said, Chapter 390. "Oh." Mu Qinghua's eyes were filled with interest when she heard this. She stared at Jing Yin with interest. Today's competition has ended and Princess Xiaoya did not win. Tomorrow's horse taming test will be the key to victory. I wonder how confident Princess Xiaoya is in winning tomorrow's horse taming test? Jing Yin asked Mu Xiaoya with a faint smile on her face. "I have been in and out of the military camp since I was young. What kind of wild horse have I not tamed?" Mu Xiaoya raised her chin proudly and said, "I will definitely win tomorrow's competition." "Princess Xiaoya, I'm afraid you don't know Jingyu well." Jing Yin immediately laughed when she heard this. Her eyes were filled with darkness as she coldly said, "You can tame a fierce horse, but Jingyu, she can tame a vicious wolf." "What?" Mu Xiaoya's eyes widened in shock as she looked at Jing Yin. "Prince Mu, you must have heard of this, right?" Jing Yin did not answer, but turned to Mu Qinghua.
Mu Qinghua's face turned slightly solemn. She narrowed her eyes and said, I've investigated Jingyu. She tamed 2 gray wolves and kept them by her side. I also know that Jingyu grew up in the Roman forest and has been with beasts since she was young. She grew up in the forest? Mu Xiaoya's eyes were filled with shock. She did not expect Jingyu's background to be like this. She thought that Jingyu was just an ordinary girl from a prestigious family. That's right. If Princess Xiaoya wants to win in horse taming, I'm afraid it will be difficult. Jing Yan said calmly. I originally thought that Jingyu was a wild girl who grew up in the forest, so I was sure that she would not know anything about the four arts. But you are different. You are the princess of Nanli. As long as you can defeat Jingyu in the first 2 rounds, there will be no need for the second round. But I didn't expect you to be so useless. Mu Qinghua scolded Mu Xiaoya angrily. Mu Xiaoya wanted to defend herself, but she did not dare to say it out loud. Crown Prince Mu, I came late at night to deliver treasures to Princess Xiao Yu. Jing Yin faintly smiled. She took out a small jade bottle and said, This is the magic treasure for Princess Xiao Yu's victory tomorrow. What is this? Mu Qinghua's eyes flickered as she looked up at Jing Yin. As long as you sprinkle this thing on Jing Yu's clothes, tomorrow's victory will definitely be yours. Jing Yan's expression was very calm, and there was not even the slightest fluctuation in her eyes. Mu Qinghua and Mu Xiaoya's eyes widened when they heard this. You want me to use medicine? Mu Qinghua squinted at Jingyu and said, If I remember correctly, Jingyu is your sister, right? Why should I believe you? Ha ha ha. Crown Prince Mu, you must be joking. Jing Yin covered her mouth and laughed. There can only be one granddaughter in the Prime Minister's residence. I don't have an elder sister. As Jing Yan's words fell, Mu Qinghua's lips slowly curled into a smile. Mu Xiaoya, who was standing at the side, trembled and her face turned pale. Her gaze fell on the white jade bottle on the table, and she suddenly felt like she did not want to compete. It's up to Crown Prince Mu whether you want to do it or not. I'm just here to deliver something. With that, Jing Yin smiled faintly and bent down. She lifted her hand to cover her head and turned to leave. That petite figure walked out of the embassy's back door and strolled into a small alley. She slowly stopped in her tracks. You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.